Imagine a town in South Africa where everyone is almost white. A town many people believe that black South Africans cannot live in. Some call it natural preservation. Others call it apartheid in disguise. But what is the truth? Today, we are going inside one of the most controversial communities in the world, Orania. Orania is located in South Africa's Northern Cape province. Founded in 1991, it was designed as a self-sufficient Afrikaner community. To understand Orania, we must first understand apartheid. Many people believed apartheid's end would also mean the end of racial separation. But another story was beginning. This is where the controversy begins. Despite controversy, Orania has built schools, businesses, and local institutions. Supporters argue Orania represents freedom of association. Critics see Orania very differently. What happens next may shape debates about identity and belongings for decades. I want to ask a difficult question. South Africa has witnessed periodic xenophobic violence directed at African migrants. Foreign nationals have been accused of taking jobs, operating businesses, and taking their women. But while this debate dominates public discourse, another reality exists within South Africa itself. Orania continues to exist in a community that many critics argue symbolizes division in a country that fought to overcome division. So the question becomes, why do certain issues generate more anger than others? Why are some forms of exclusion seen as urgent threats, while others are tolerated, defended, and ignored? Is it because one issue affects daily economic frustrations more directly? Is it because Orania is relatively small and geographically isolated? Is it because societies often direct their frustrations toward those with less power? These are uncountable questions, and I'm not here to provide easy answers. But understanding South Africa requires us to examine all these realities honestly, because the nation's priorities often reveal its biggest fears, its unresolved tensions, and hope for the future. What do you think? Is Orania an example of cultural freedom? Or does it reflect unresolved divisions from South Africa's past? Tell me respectfully in the comments. Thank you.